come to these talks and come to something like this, you're looking for something. One of the questions that deserves to be asked is, what is it we're looking for? What are you here for? And why are you here? You're looking for something. We might be looking for God or some kind of inspiration. But there's a reason also why you're looking. And, something has happened to you along your life story, along your life's journey somewhere. Within you, to come to something like this, there has to be some kind of dissatisfaction. Some kind of anxiety, worry, fear, or wandering. It may be the case with you that all is well in your world. That the universe has given you everything you need, family, the things you need, and the things that are necessary in your life. But still, you feel there's something missing. And this is what brings most people upon a spiritual journey. Come to places like this, looking for something. But the thing about it is that I have nothing to give you. I don't want anything from you. And I have absolutely nothing to give you. And neither has anybody else. Anything you get anew from anywhere or anyone is of little use to you at this stage in your search. Only what's not new has any worth. And there is something about you and something about the speaker that has neither a beginning or an end. And nobody can give it to us in any way whatsoever. And one of the reasons it can't be given is because you already have it. That sense of conscious presence, that sense of being that we spoke about this morning. This is my one treasure that did not come about with birth and that does not disappear with the death of the body. Nothing can touch it. And nobody has to tell you you have it because you know it already. You know you are. Without any doubt you know you are. You have always known it. Before you were ever entertained in this world with any symbolism, language, or were introduced to these strangers who told you they were your parents, and these other strangers who you were told were your brothers and your sisters. You knew that you existed and that you were. You knew it in the womb. The grass knows it, the trees know it, the birds know it, the plants know it. Everybody knows it. And so what is it that happens? What happens is that mind, as in the thinking process, localized mind, if you like, creates an obscuration upon my true nature. It's obscured. It only takes a very little fog or a very little cloud to shroud the great mountain. But the mountain does not disappear. It's just out of sight for a short span of time. And so it is with my true nature. The trouble begins at about the age of 1.5 years to 2 years for the young infant, more or less. Prior to that, the little infant is in its paradisal state. It's in a state of completeness, beingness, without any want, need whatsoever. Nothing has been laid upon its head as of yet. It's aware and it knows it exists. It doesn't need its parents to tell it. It doesn't need any outside authority or influence to tell it that it exists. It knows it. The scorpion knows it. The rat knows it. The flower knows it. All the other creatures as well as the human creatures. And when thought starts to stir, mostly thought is a movement in consciousness. It's a special effect of consciousness. It doesn't stand alone, independent on its own whatsoever. The tree makes leaf, it's a special effect of the tree, and the tree is a special effect of consciousness. And thought within the human creature and within the psyche of the human creature is one of the special effects of consciousness. Tremendous and wonderful special effects. And this thought movement comes from words, from symbolism. And when memory captures the thought process, it creates what we call a past, quite innocently. And we think that past is behind us. But for the little infant, while this is all happening innocently and through no fault to anybody, little by little, the little infant starts to associate with this body. Prior to that, it's absolutely unaware of having a body. And unconcerned, absolutely. It doesn't know if it's a boy, a girl, that it has any nationality. It doesn't know about names or need anything. Any of this does not fulfill it anymore or bring anything to it that it doesn't already have. These symbols that we add later, like mother, father, brother, sister, nationality, and so on. Boy, girl. And once it starts to identify with this body, and this me feeling, like the birth of the ego, is the birth of the me feeling. And once this gets established, or enters the equation of the young infant, this me feeling, it's also the birth of duality. It's also the eviction of the child from innocence, if you like, into duality, because when the me arises, so does the not me. Because the pair of opposites bring one another. Like if I say to you left, I'm also actually saying not right or right. One brings the other, up brings down, back brings front. And all our symbolism and our language is centered upon this duality. So our symbolism and our language brings a duality and brings a division and separation upon not alone the natural world, but upon our humanity that doesn't exist prior to that. It's created in our language. So, for the little child comes the me and the not me. So, if this is me, well, obviously, the camera is not me. No? And that's not me. And that's not me. And that's not me. And this is the beginning of isolation. No? This is the beginning of the first violence. And of the first corruption. Upon the pure innocence comes this corruption of duality that creates the me and the not me. And this sets a pattern for the whole span of a lifetime of the little child and of the adult later. We become prisoners of the pair of opposites. You know? We become prisoners of here and there. You know? We become prisoners of the opposites like hell and heaven. You know? Everything is played out. All our symbolism is played out, and our actions within these pairs of opposites. You know? Good and bad, nice, not nice, happy, sad. And we're caught between these things. You know? This is what carries us off. And nobody is to blame for this. This is just the way it is. You know? And we never seem to question this at all. You know? We mostly are carried off into life in a story. A psychological story. That's not true. But this story also has a value in that it helps us to house and shelter us psychologically, to help us survive the existence on planet Earth. And most people that attend these talks have in one degree or another fallen out of their story in life. All is very fine if the story in life, if one story in life shelters and houses you. You know. That's fine, and that's a wonderful thing. You know. But that's not so for a lot of people. You know. And to fall out of your story in life is like falling out of a boat at sea. You're in deep waters and in big trouble. And you may not be able to get back into the boat. Then in another way, it can be a great blessing, this shattering, and this brutal shattering of falling out of your story in life. You know, a big emotional crisis where you're rendered absolutely, totally powerless. All notions of self-will and willpower to bring about, to try and change this situation, you know, is banished, and I'm rendered powerless. No. But it can also be the beginning of a new way of life, if one can survive that, and lucky enough that the dice falls in one's favor. Very often, a lot of people do not survive falling out of their story in life. And tying in with that, the person who seeks liberation or who is looking for God is itself a story. The person Pat is a story. There is no such thing, absolutely speaking, as an autonomous individual with free will and choice of action as Pat the person. It's a story. And part of the story is that it's associated with this body. Now, this body is innocent of all this. No? This body can survive perfectly well without a person. Because what do? Do I circulate the blood? Do I grow the hair? Do I do the breathing? Do I beat the heart? Do I take care of all the millions and millions of miles of of DNA? Do I organize all the cells, the millions and millions of cells, with such an intelligence that every cell knows what every other cell is doing all at the same time? What have I to do with this? In what way am I involved with all this? If I was doing the breathing, then I would have to stay awake at night in case the breathing stops and I die. Do I think the thoughts? No. Society adds and adds to this fable. This is a children's bedtime story for slow learning adults. And psychologically speaking, I wouldn't have any problem in the world if I could think thoughts. Because if I have the power to think thoughts, well, obviously I also have the equal power to stop them. We'll just try it and see how far you get. The thousands and thousands and thousands of thoughts that stream past in consciousness. And when I bring attention to one thought, then another thought arises in like manner, and so on and so on and so on. A self-perpetuating, self-creating process. This is one of the first freedoms to be won from this terrible illusion of being a thinker of the thoughts. Like, this apparatus is only fractionally conscious. What we call the unconscious is the totality of consciousness, the totality of total intelligence. And consciousness is not private property. There's no Pat that's conscious, or there's no consciousness that belongs to Pat. It's not private property. And if one takes the trouble even to inquire into psychology and psychoanalysis and mental illness, even in the briefest and slightest way, you can be acquainted with people who, unfortunately, the shut-out mechanisms, like the see, hear, taste, touch and smell, and the interpreting center of the mind, are no longer shutting out the vast stream of thoughts from what's called the unconsciousness, or consciousness at large, and it gets too much and the person is overpowered by it. And they no longer find themselves able to come back into the lie, into the story, which is a lie, but a necessary lie. It soothes us and it carries us through, and we hope and pray that our heads won't let us down. But sometimes they do. So we build up this shocking picture that's reaffirmed by society and by various teachings, maybe, and power structures and whatever. This has been happening for all time, and in all cultures and in all places, and continues to do. But I feel we're the luckiest people who have ever lived. And have emerged out of the greatest and darkest of ignorance. And it is quite shocking to discover that the wonderful minds of today are still trapped in this children's bedtime story. You see, because almost everything about the human creature is designed for looking out. We look outwards. As we were speaking earlier, like the human creature has never seen its own face, except reflected poorly through some kind of a device called a mirror or whatever. Can never see all its own body at once. In this room right now, I am only partly conscious of some of the clothes you're wearing, the colours, what you may look like, other things in the room. And we live dimly, in this obscuration that we call reality or the real world. And it's quite shocking when you come to this place to listen to somebody like me saying these things, because there's a danger in listening to somebody like me, because I could take away the world that you live in, and maybe you'd be better off staying with it. You come looking for something and everything else is taken away from you. And hopefully you leave here with more questions than answers. Because you don't need answers from any outside source. Nobody has anything to give you. Speaking absolutely. You are your own authority. You've been led too long. You don't need a leader. You don't need any authority of any description whatsoever. I'm not speaking now at the sense of breaking civil laws and disturbing society or anything like that whatsoever. We're speaking at a finer and deeper level here. You have the authority. You were never born. You never acquired anything. You don't need anything whatsoever. With a body or without a body, it's equal. And when we fall into that trap of the early corruption, of duality, I just use the word corruption because I don't know if I have any other word. And because this is the beginning of something very important, very beautiful and very tremendous and miraculous in the extreme. But there's also a great sadness, you see, because with the arising of the me comes the not me. And this is the first separation. This is the first boundary. This is the first barbed wire fence. This is the first Great Wall of China. This is the first defiance, if you like, the me and the not me, because it also brings the mine and the my. Do you see? And this is the beginning of violence. Like the great violences that we dislike in the world, as we call it, are in society. And we point the finger at the sexual corruption, the financial corruption, the political corruption, the social corruption, the emotional corruption. But I am also corrupt if I believe I'm a person, an individual, because this is also a corruption. And this is where the corruption and the violence begins. It does not begin in the nation and across borders and boundaries. It begins at the birth of duality. And no other place. It's played out on a bigger stage and on a grander scale. But I am responsible for it, if you like to say it in that way. But this is where it begins with me. We're competitive. We're competitive in the relationship, we're competitive in the family, we're competitive in the workplace, we're competitive on the street, and we're competitive. And competition is a violence. And this is why, for self-inquiry, it's not a la-la land, And any philosophy or suggestion that will say, stop the thoughts and you will be happy, is a greater violence and an even greater foolishness. Because if nobody is there to think the thoughts, who is there to stop the thoughts? No? And what harm have thoughts done? It's a bit like saying it would be better if somebody could take the wetness out of water and it would be easier to deal with it. No? We would all get wet. You cannot take the wetness out of water because wetness is the essence of water. And the think thoughts is part of the essence of the universal consciousness. It put leaves on trees, it puts flowers on roses. You know? It puts scent in the rose. And thoughts are also a special effect, no? And to engage and think that if I become self-realized, or awakened, or enlightened, and if more people do this, then there'll be less violence in the world, and we'll all live in a la-la and whistling Dixie for the rest of our days. No? But this is escapism. Anything or philosophy that prostitutes itself to time, that it's not very good now, but if I make an effort to change it, it'll be good later. No? I think Alan Watts once used the term, it's marrying an illusion to a futility and expecting a result. No? We're like children in a kindergarten school. No? And what that kind of thinking also does is a denial of one's humanity and a great ignorance of one's humanity for the beauty and the burden of our humanity. It's a violent misunderstanding of Pat the person and the human creature. I'll tell you one moment that there's no such thing as Pat the person, but then I'm speaking absolutely. When I'm speaking relatively, I'm speaking about having compassion and love for Pat the person, and understanding Pat the person, and understanding how I came out of the natural world and the relationship with the natural world, in the physical sense, in the body sense. No? We're also violent against the natural world, and we're violent against our animality, and we try to walk away from it. No? And somebody told us that the human creature was a special kind of a creature, made specially by some god, no? And I done a little bit of writing recently, and I was saying about the big problem God had was that he had no money, because it was all a very rush job, And almost all our concepts and beliefs have a violent content. And anything, or any search, or any inquiry, or any attempt at self-realization or enlightenment, or whatever we want to call it, that is exclusive of anything, or speaks about getting rid of anything, or about banishing anything, is of no use to you whatsoever. That's religion. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with religion, but it has this kind of tenet that it's not good now, but it will be better later if things change. Now, that might be a fair enough statement if there was such a thing as time, or if there was such a thing as a future to do it in, but there's not. Because this is another concept. This is another children's bedtime story for slow learning adults. No? And time is a wonderful thing, as the clock talks about it. But there is no such thing as a Tuesday or a Monday. No? And is a Friday any different from a Thursday? No? Does the natural world, or the sun, the moon, and the stars, or the planet Earth know anything about months or years, or anything like that? We superimpose these things, and it works quite well for our communication purposes, so we can do business. If I say to you, I meet you at a certain street corner at 3 o'clock, then you know that if you're there at 3 o'clock, there's a good chance I'll be there. Knowing me, there's a good chance I mightn't be there either. But it's good for communication and for business and makes life easier. Now, but it's another story. See? And another part of the fallacy and the children's bedtime story is because when this me arises, this me feeling, and I speak about the me feeling when it is associated with the body, that this is me. And Bill is not me, obviously. If this is me, then that's not me. This is the birth of space. Because now there's a space between the me and the not me. Before, in the unicity, because there was no me, there was no not me. So there was no separation and no division, and there was no space. There was no, things were not held apart. Things are held apart in our language. And we create our language and our symbolism, which serves us well in many other areas, but it comes at a high cost and a heavy price. And our language creates divisions and separations where there formerly were none. And then we run around like crazy trying to dissolve these separations and divisions. Like, for instance, if I can find something to demonstrate, and I have nothing, then could you give me that book, Dawn? Okay. Oh, look, this is a good chance to promote the book. So here's a book, and we're speaking as you see it. You know, for you, this is the right-hand side of the book, and for you, this is the left-hand side of the book. Well, then you would say that these are opposite ends. Obviously, the right-hand side of the book is not the left-hand side, and the left-hand side is not the right-hand side. So they are held apart. They are polar opposites. But what we generally neglect to realize is that what separates and holds them apart also joins them together. So it's a unit, it's unicity. The left and the right and the opposites come about only in our language, in our description, and in our symbolism. See? But there is no left or right. It's unity. What seems to hold things apart also holds them together. Recently, I started a little bit of writing about something, and I don't know if I can finish it or not. And it's entitled My Search for the White Man. Because I have never seen a white person. I've looked and looked and looked. And I've been told that such a creature exists. That the white man and the white woman exist. And that they have white children and all this kind of thing. But I have failed to find it. I've seen white paint, and I've seen birds with white feathers. And I've seen that kind of whiteness, but never in skin colour yet. And I certainly don't consider myself white. And I am not white. I'm a varying degree of some kind of colours. But here's the thing, you see. Because if I'm white, I'm not black. If I'm a white person, well, I'm not a black person. So I'm creating a division and a separation where there is none. With my language, I'm discriminating. I'm being violent. And then somebody tells me, well, you shouldn't discriminate between the white man and the black man. No. But it's our language that discriminates. If I think I'm white, then I'm being violent. Where is the white person? We bring about these divisions and separations through our language and our symbolism without ever really thinking what it is we're doing. And they create obstacles and divisions, and then we spend a lot of time and effort and fight a lot of wars and battles, to kind of sort it out and straighten it out. And one of the reasons why these things are being highlighted here is to try and get a glimpse into this whole business of the beauty and the burden of our humanity. And to highlight as best I am able, and as best the words that are allowed to me, and the language that's allowed to me is able, this fallacy that there is a person called Pat, an individual who needs enlightenment. And if he gets enlightened and becomes self-realized, and more people do that also, then the world will be better, there'll be more love, and there'll be less wars and violence. But the whole attempt and the whole idea of this is a violence in the first place, because it's not true. First find out, who is this entity called Pat, and was there such a thing born? And is this marriage of the psyche and the body a happy marriage? And are the results that we think it produces correct results? No. Is it true? Because there's also another sadness here, and this is why there are many traps in self-inquiry and in what we call spirituality. No? There are many great spiritual traps of old and of the present day. No? Because I am attempting to get something for someone that does not exist. Self-realization is not something that's for a person. Self-realization is the realization from the idea of being a person. It's the liberation from the idea of just being a person, from the prison of our language and our symbolism and our concepts that such a person exists. This is what self-realization is in enlightenment. It's not for the person, to improve the person and be a better person and better society. And the idea is honorable. But it's like the cat going around in circles trying to follow its tail. We can spend a whole lifetime on this endeavor and run around seeking it everywhere. But you won't get it everywhere or anywhere. And when you come across somebody like the speaker, I have nothing to give you, At the best, at the very best, what I can be is like the signpost standing at the side of the road that says, this is the way to Dublin, this is the way to Madrid, or this is the way to London, not to Birmingham or whatever. But the signpost won't get up and take you there. It'll only point the way in the journey is around. Then there's another side to this inquiry, the relative side. In that, to be the best person Pat can possibly be, it is necessary to understand the burden and the beauty of my humanity. Like anything or any inquiry that does not take the relative along with it as the absolute is not its own inquiry. It's lopsided. Once something